Here's some foods that'll help you fall asleep. You see, people have different problems with sleep. Me, for example, I have a hard time staying asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night, but I don't have any problem falling asleep. But maybe you're someone that has a hard time falling asleep. Once you're out, you're out. So let's go ahead and jump right into the details here. This first one is pretty cool. Okay, they took a look at asparagus. Okay, in this particular case, they were looking at asparagus powder, which is essentially just concentrated asparagus. What they did is they gave subjects 24 grams of asparagus powder for 60 days, okay? And they did find their overall sleep time improved, right? Their sleep time went from 5.1 hours to 6.1 hours. That's a pretty big jump, but I'm more focused on the sleep latency, how long it took them to fall asleep. That went from 50 minutes down to 25.3 minutes. So almost cut in half by having this asparagus powder. Now, could you get the same effect with asparagus? Yeah, if you look at the concentration, 24 grams of asparagus powder, that would probably be about 20 stalks of asparagus. That's a lot of asparagus, but the bottom line is that you probably didn't even need this whole amount. But you can also find asparagus powder. I have no asparagus powder sponsor. I'm not even saying that. You could probably just find it on Amazon. But what's the mechanism here? Well, there was a study published in the Journal of Food Science, and it was done in rodents and humans, okay? And they found that asparagus seems to affect the expression of what is called a heat shock protein. So it affects heat shock protein 70. Now, this is the same protein, chaperoning protein, that is increased when you go in a sauna. And what a heat shock protein does is it chaperones proteins so that cells rebuild properly. Now, that kind of means nothing. It's kind of like Greek to you, right? But what does it do in very simple terms as far as sleep? Well, it impacts the pituitary and the hypothalamus to ultimately reduce cortisol levels. So when you have more heat shock protein, a lot of times you are more relaxed, which explains why a lot of times when people get out of a sauna, they're a little more relaxed. That's why I like to sauna at night lately. It's just nice to kind of wind down, helps me sleep. So it's interesting, maybe asparagus plus sauna might be something interesting to try. Now the next one is going to be raw milk or kefir. Now this is interesting though, because in the milk study, there's definitely some solid evidence that having a little bit of milk an hour before bed can dramatically improve your sleep onset. As a matter of fact, they found that it had similar effects to diazepam when it came down to triggering sleep onset. But there's a serious problem that comes with drinking a big glass of milk an hour before bed. One, there's a lot of sugar in that. Two, it's probably going to make you have to get up and pee. So that is a little bit of an issue. So with that, I look at some other research that was fascinating that looked at fermented milk. Now, not everyone can go out and get fermented milk, but you could get kefir, raw kefir, or even regular kefir, because it might have a similar benefit. Check out this study. So this study was published in Beneficial Microbes, and it took a look at students that were leading up to a very important exam. So it followed them 8 weeks leading up to their exam and 3 weeks after their exam. Now, in a normal control group, as they got closer to their exam, their sleep onset increased. It took them longer to fall asleep as their stress increased, basically when they're going to take the exam. Now, what was interesting is that the fermented milk group ended up not having any increase in sleep latency, no increase in the amount of time to fall asleep. And they associated this with the lactobacillus, with the change in the gut biome. Why is this important? Well, the gut biome directly impacts our production of serotonin. This serotonin is critical for sleep, but it also helped create additional neurotransmitters. So it synthesized more neurotransmitters that are associated with sleep. So what does this look like for you? Well, I would recommend kefir, because kefir is going to be something you can have a quarter cup of. It's going to be low carb, it's going to be low calorie, you're not going to have to pee because it's pretty thick, and you're going to get the microbial effect. Could a probiotic have a similar effect? Possibly, because what we're looking at here is an alteration of the gut microbiome that is allowing someone to be more resilient and form more neurotransmitters. If you're interested in probiotics, I put a link down below for the one that I recommend. It's called Seed. I don't take a lot of probiotics. In fact, I don't even take them all the time personally. I take them when I'm changing things or when I'm trying to sleep better, stuff like that. And that's usually what I recommend people do, unless they have a very poor diet where they need to have them all the time. But it's definitely something worth trying. Seed is a capsule inside of a capsule, cool technology. So it's a synbiotic, a prebiotic and a probiotic. So I popped a link down below. That's a 15% off discount link if you want to give them a shot. They are a sponsor on this channel. They have been for a couple of years. So you've probably seen me talk about them, but if you haven't tried them, now might be a time to if you're trying to improve your sleep. So that link is down below, right below this video, top line of the description. The next one is a food that you could have with your dinner. Okay, I am a big fan of adding flaxseed. I like flaxseed, I like ground flaxseed. I try to add it as much as I can because there are a myriad of different fiber benefits, but it's also very high in tryptophan and very high in magnesium. So with this, we look at a paper that looked specifically at magnesium, and I found that 500 milligrams of magnesium made a huge impact on sleep onset. They found that it reduced cortisol, similar to how the asparagus reduced cortisol, but not via heat shock proteins. In this case, it does so by occupying the NMDA receptor, which essentially just reduces stress and the amount of excitotoxicity that can sort of hit a cell. So basically makes you calm down. So is there enough magnesium and tryptophan in flaxseed to do the job? Well, you're not going to get 500 milligrams worth. You might be better off taking a magnesium supplement. But when you combine it with the fiber impact and the tryptophan you get from flax, it's probably worth sprinkling on a salad or sprinkling in some food throughout the course of the evening. Next up, we have any kind of fatty fish. Now, preferably like a sockeye salmon or some kind of good wild-caught salmon. What is it that is so unique about this? Well, when you look at the research, you see there was a study that compared fatty fish to regular chicken, beef, or any other meat. And they found that fatty fish, not the other meats, improved sleep onset. Now, why is this happening? Why is it helping them fall asleep faster? It likely has to do with the vitamin D content, which is interesting because vitamin D increases transcription factor for tryptophan hydroxylase 2. What does this mean? Well, basically at a very important sort of cellular, like nuclear DNA level, really, a transcription factor is what programs DNA to ultimately be produced. So this DNA allowed for this important enzyme, tryptophan hydroxylase 2, to be created. Without the activation of tryptophan hydroxylase, you cannot convert tryptophan into serotonin. So if you cannot convert tryptophan into serotonin, you cannot convert serotonin into melatonin. So this is called a rate limiting step. So without vitamin D to really trigger the production of this tryptophan hydroxylase, you're not able to actually produce melatonin. So vitamin D at bedtime can actually help this. But then you combine it with the omega-3s that are in salmon, and you have a double whammy. Because the prostaglandin E2 that would normally trigger inflammation in the brain can impact sleep latency as well. And when you take something like an omega-3, it's very notorious for decreasing those prostaglandin E2s. So reducing inflammation in the brain, that's allowing you to get the proper neurotransmitter release to help you sleep. Next up isn't a food, it's a tea, and it's chamomile tea. And there was a study published in BMC Complementary and Alternative Medicine that was interesting. It had subjects that had insomnia for 28 days take chamomile tea. And when you looked at the data on the surface, it doesn't look statistically significant between the control group and the chamomile group. But if you look really closely at the data, you see the interventional group that had chamomile ended up having a decrease in sleep latency by 16 minutes. So onset improved 16 minutes, whereas the control group actually increased 1 minute. This is pretty wild, and the mechanism here is pretty well known. Chamomile binds to a benzodiazepine receptor because it's got something called apigenin in it. And when the apigenin binds to this benzodiazepine receptor, it has an effect much like Xanax, benzodiazepam. That is the receptor that a Xanax would bind to kind of sedate you. The downside with it is you might feel groggy the next morning if you're not used to it. Next one is going to be specific carbohydrate timing. If you have high glycemic carbohydrates 3 hours or 4 hours before bed, you're in a good spot. There's a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, had subjects consume high glycemic carbs either 4 hours before bed or 1 hour before bed. Both groups had improvements in sleep onset because you have a big spike in insulin and a drop, and that allows the large neutral amino acids to go into the muscles, which allows the tryptophan to go into the brain. Long story short, it helps you fall asleep. The downside is it might make you wake up later. And what they found with this study is that if you had carbs 1 hour before bed, you fell asleep, but not nearly as fast as if you had them 4 hours before bed. So carbs at night will help you sleep, but you need to have them about 4 hours before bed. So having them a few hours before bed is the best way. So do you have sugar? Do you have desserts? No, because that's going to be an inflammatory thing as well, which might impact things negatively. But what you want to do is you want to do things like maybe white rice, organic white rice, maybe a regular baked potato with nothing on it, something like that. Another little trick is something that's very high glycemic is going to be organic puffed rice. Okay, kind of like Rice Krispies, but Rice Krispies probably have a bunch of other stuff in them. So you just want something that's not sweetened, but it's like puffed rice, maybe a straight up rice cake with nothing on it. The last one is really weird, and I'm not a big lettuce guy because I feel it's kind of like worthless, to be completely candid with you. But there was some interesting research looking at romaine lettuce compared to regular lettuce, red leaf lettuce. Very interesting stuff. They found that lettuce seed and straight up romaine lettuce actually improved sleep onset. And it wasn't a small amount, it was actually quite significant. And the reason that they're thinking this is because romaine lettuce in particular contains some polyphenols that seem to be quite strong that might reduce some of the oxidative stress in the brain, thereby reducing inflammation in the brain, helping us sleep. It's not nearly as powerful as these other ones that I've listed, but if you're a veggie person and you like salads, using romaine might work here. It's not enough to push me over the edge, but it's worth mentioning. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.